So just so you know, I am here with the girls. My wife just left on a walk with friends. So if the girls have any complaints or anything, they may need attending to. But that's just how we roll because we're keeping it real. So how are you doing?
Doing excellent. Just got back from a little camping trip up in Flagstaff. So we went to a KOA, like campgrounds over there.
Oh, a KOA, great. You know, I was actually going to go to a KOA. Where are we going to go? I think we were planning to go to Flagstaff, actually. And then, like, it was right as COVID-19 was kind of picking up. And so then I called and canceled, which was too bad. But yeah, they look cool. I've never actually stayed at one, but they look neat.
Like, there was, 12 feet from us, there were 4 different families.
Mm-hmm.
And like the whole thing is just incredibly packed.
Mm-hmm.
We brought, we have a 6-pound toy poodle, and then another one, I don't know, 15 pounds or something like that. And like there were other dogs in the campground, and they kept waking up and barking at each other. It's just, that's not the kind of camping I'm used to. Usually, go off into the middle of nowhere.
Right.
That's what Boy Scouts do, right? I'm used to the Boy Scout model.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and since I've got a trailer now, I'm kind of more into like having electricity, but yeah, I do like being off on my own. So, and I'm planning to go into Zion National Park in about a month, and so I have a hotel reservation and a campsite reservation. And I can cancel either one. Well, let me ask, did you feel comfortable in such close proximity to the other campers?
Yeah, so it's very, from my understanding, it's very rare that COVID has ever passed person to person outside. It's like almost entirely inside.
Yeah.
And so I'm just really not all that concerned when I'm outside.
Okay, good. And what about bathrooms? Do you know if that's
there was a bathroom, but I mean, you walk in and use the urinal and then you walk out, right?
That's true.
I think, I guess.
Yeah, I think my wife's more concerned with the girls because taking them into a bathroom, it's as it is even under normal circumstances, it's a very scary experience just thinking of all the germs that they're coming in contact with. Because my daughters are not very hygienic naturally, especially my 4-year-old. But anyway, so we might do the hotel instead. But anyway, I'm looking forward to going somewhere. It's our annual Zion trip.
Yeah.
So okay, well that sounds fun. And so was that just you and your wife?
No, it's I'm living in Philadelphia, right? But when COVID picked up, me and my wife fled to Arizona. We figured that Mesa was going to be a little bit more tame than Philadelphia. And so we're living with my brother-in-law. And so we went with him and his girlfriend.
Okay, cool. All right, you know what? I already hear the girls screaming their heads off, so I am going to go check on them real quick.
Go ahead.
Let's see, is there a timestamp for our meeting here that we're in? I don't see one.
If you stop recording and then re-record, it'll just be 2 audio files.
Oh, I could pause. It gives me a pause option.
No, there you
Let's
go.
try that. We'll see what happens. All right, be right back. All right, well, we'll see how this works. So my 4-year-old is kind of scared of sleeping in the bedroom, even though her sister's with her. And so she wants to sleep in our room, but neither my wife or me are there right now. So that's what she was screaming about. So anyway, I brought her in here with me. So we'll see how this works. So if you hear whimpering, that's what's going on there. So, but hopefully she'll be okay. Yes, and I just pressed resume. So hopefully I am like wanting to be as lazy as possible and do as little editing as possible and just So one audio file works for me.
Perfect.
Okay, so cool. So it's just one night up in Flagstaff. Were you? I know I know of a KOA in Flagstaff. Was it the one like right as you're leaving, like just north of the city?
I don't know where it is in comparison to the city. I mean, it's pretty much. It feels like it's in the middle of the city, but
Yeah,
maybe it's on the north side.
it's probably that same one. But anyway, I want to go there at some point because it seems like a good operation. Probably good for the kids as well. But yeah, so we'll see. Yeah, I have a big with Zion National Park. It's going to be a big family reunion. And I think everyone's planning on it. My parents are very cautious, but they have a hotel room as well. So, but you know, like you said, it's all outside pretty much, so that helps. And we have my 9-year-old grandmother there.
Air mattress. That was our big problem. Or if you do bring an air mattress, make sure to bring some thick blankets to sleep on top of.
Mm-hmm.
I was freezing.
Yeah. Well, so if we camp, we have the trailer, so we'll have the bedding and we have a heater inside as well.
Right. Because you got
the pop-up trailer. Yep. Which is best $700 bargain buy I've ever gotten. Yeah, we got that for really cheap. It's an old it's like 40 years old, but in actually pretty good condition. Had to do a few minor repairs to it. Yeah. So you're in Arizona now, which other than time distance really isn't much of a benefit to us because we can't see each other in person anyway.
Yeah, I keep on trying to think about, can we still go kayaking? I mean,
yeah, that's it. I always feel like when we're kayaking that we're all so far apart. I wish we could just be like lassoed together or something, because sometimes it's like we're carrying a conversation and then 10 seconds later, one of us is like way up the river or something. But I guess in a way that would probably be fine. And actually, when I mentioned that we were going to be talking tonight, my wife was like, "Oh, okay, that's fine." The only thing I was thinking of doing was going kayaking. I thought, "Oh, yeah, that would be cool." But that was too much to plan at that point. We were already having lunch, and you know how much time it takes to plan all that. Although a little bit less now that we have our own kayaks. But
yeah.
How much longer are you here? Would you be able to do one another weekend? Or are you okay?
Yeah.
Well, maybe
we don't know how long we're going to be here. We're kind of just feeling it out.
Yeah. Well, maybe next weekend. I have a wedding reception on the Saturday, but maybe the Friday we could.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll have to think about that. Yeah. No, it's that's one of my favorite things to do. Yeah, and maybe we can mic ourselves while we're on the river too. And
exactly. I think some of the most interesting and philosophical conversations I've ever had have been on the river.
Yeah. It's something about that location. Well, in Plato's dialogues, they were always like, it seemed like location was always, they're at some party and they're all drinking and lounging around. It seemed to be a stimulative environment for them. But for us, it's the river.
Yeah, I'm wondering. So there's something called the default mode network.
Okay.
Is generally so like you have rather than thinking of the brain in terms of like the parts like the thalamus and the cortex or whatever. Kind of the modern wave is to think about it in terms of networks.
Okay.
Right. Salience network. The default mode network.
So is that less anatomical and more functional?
It all connects together.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So, when they say like, oh, this part of the brain is activated, now they think, well, it's not just that part of the brain because it's also all these other things and the whole network of what lets you doing a certain activity, right? And so the default mode network often is activated when you're doing kind of nothing, staring out a for example.
Okay.
where your most creative insights come from is when your default mode network is activated.
Oh,
If you need to be creative, basically, like you just kind of need to go for a walk. Basically,
okay.
probably your like salience network has been activated. You need to like deactivate that and just kind of go into default mode. And
Do
that's
you know, does that do anything for learning?
yes. Yes.
So what does it do for learning when you're in your default network?
It's part of the learning process in that it's where the connections are actually being made, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trying to learn something and you're incredibly focused on whatever the concept is, like that's not your default network. That's like you trying to like interpret and understand. But when you take a step back, then it's like, okay, now you have these connections going on in the background that you're not even really consciously aware of, or
Yeah.
maybe you are, and that's where those connections actually occur. So
That sounds that's what I would have guessed just from my experience, like in listening to audiobooks a lot. It seems like when it's so like a lot of times first time I'll listen to something, it's just kind of breezing over me, and then but if it's my second time through something, and like on a hike or on a drive or even falling asleep sometimes, then it just kind of clicks, like without any effort. That's what I find. So anyway, that's an interesting concept.
Yeah, I mean, it's not my field of expertise, so I might be simplifying it way too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if it's like that feeling of it clicking. I'm not sure,
Mm-hmm.
What's actually going on physiologically there.
Mm-hmm.
But
I guess not even clicking, but more like I'm just talking my own personal experience, but it's more like it just feels natural, like it, like things just seem to fit and seem obvious and
yeah,
just intuitive, I guess, where they didn't before.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, so I was looking over the list of things that are basically like our pet topics.
Yeah.
So like the greatest problems of the universe, and we're going to solve them. We're it's never been done before, but I'm feeling pretty good. This is two of us together here on Zoom. I think we got a good shot at it. So
I created that list. I mean, those are the topics that draw my interest.
Yes.
And how I think that they come together. And I'm sure that if anyone else had made the list, it would be a very different list.
Well, no, but I agree. I mean, it's well, and they're actually. So I mean, just as an example, so okay, like the is-ought problem. Okay, so that's a big one, right? And it's one that occupies a lot of my attention. I mean, a lot of the stuff I get interested in isn't necessarily real practical to how I live my life. Like, at least not directly. So, like, okay, I like learning languages. I like learning Hebrew, and okay, well, it's not necessarily something that it's going to affect how I live my life. I just find it interesting. But that kind of question, like, okay, understanding the nature of the universe, and then trying to think from that, okay, well, therefore what? What do I do about that? How should that affect how I live my life? That seems like that could actually be very practical and make a big difference. And so that's important. And as a religious question, like, okay, what do I think the nature of reality is? What's my origin? What is God like? Does God exist? What does God expect of me? What are my responsibilities? Okay, yeah, that's heavy stuff. It's really like, okay, it's not just the horrible example of angels dancing on the head of a pin type stuff. It's stuff that even if it seems like it's just kind of excessive intellectual speculation, when you get down to it, actually does make a big difference. If I can describe it well, for somebody who's not.
I'm very curious how it is that how these kind of preferences and interests develop, right?
Mhm.
So like I was interested in motivation for a very long time, but that was a very pragmatic, personal problem I was dealing with, right? That I'm fairly low in conscientiousness. I was depressed. I had all these issues going on. Whereas like, if I could just do what I wanted to do, then like all of my problems would go away. But I just can't get myself off this couch to do those things.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, and so motivation became a very core interest of mine, where like
Yeah.
basically all of my studies in psychology were leading up to, or like focused on this one problem of like, how do you actually get yourself to do something,
Yeah. Yeah.
or just motivation in general? And it kind of extended beyond that because at some point I realized, well, just because I can do it, if I can, even if I can motivate myself, how do I know that I'm doing the right thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then I got interested in kind of rationality. And that led me to like, okay, but what kind of values should we even, like, what does it mean to be rational? Like what kind of values should we
Yeah.
have? And then like, how do I even know that the world is what I think it is? And that leads to like more epistemological questions. And
Right.
so, but I feel like at the center, like all of my intellectual interests kind of get wrapped up into this one problem, which is like, I knew where I wanted to be. I knew what I wanted to do. I just couldn't do it. And so like, how do I get from what is to what I, to
Yeah.
on, right? And
Yeah.
so that's kind of how I've recently phrased, and I think that kind of sums up like all of my intellectual curiosities is like, how do you get from is to on?
Mhm.
And I mean that philosophically, and I mean it pragmatically.
Right.
But like for you, like your interests, like I came up with this framework for my intellectual interests, 15 years after I decided I was interested in motivation. But like your interest, like I don't necessarily have a framework for how to think, like what are the things that interest you? For me, it was like, well, I know I want to do something, I can't figure out how to do it, so all of my intellectual curiosities stem from that. Where do your intellectual curiosities?
Yeah, you mean like how? like some type of um, way to tie it all together and explain why I'm into what I'm into. That is a good question. And yeah, I mean, what's that?
I mean, that as a personal question to you specifically, but also just kind of a general question.
Yeah. And I don't think I can answer for myself. I'll have to think about that. That is an interesting question. But yeah, I mean, it might be worth investigating. And yeah, and I appreciate you framing that as a more general question, because now I'm thinking like, I don't think I can answer that question for myself. But yeah, I think you mentioned to me before. Yeah, so like you've had like low motivation before, and that's kind of what spurred that interest in motivation. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. I think personality wise, and then like clinical, like subclinical depression maybe.
Well, but I can see how that would spill over into other things, right? Because like, okay, so yeah, I'm going to motivate myself to do something, but motivate myself to do what? There are many things you could get yourself to do, but then, well, maybe some things aren't as much worth doing. So yeah, I could definitely see how that would expand into many things.
Turning out, I mean, it wasn't always like that, right? Like I think my first like real intellectual interests, because like prior to like 15 years old, like school was school, and then everything else was video games or whatever.
Yeah.
But I probably around the age of 15 or so, I started like coming to my own, like browsing Wikipedia all day, where I was more interested in ideas.
Did you say you would browse Wikipedia when you were 15?
Yes.
Cool. Wikipedia. I don't know. When was Wikipedia invented? I don't know if I was around when I was 15. I think I still had to rely on. I don't know what online. I don't even know what online encyclopedia.
2001.
2001.
Yeah.
Okay, that is when I was. I was 15 at the beginning of 2001, so I guess I could have, but I didn't know about it.
I would spend like just way too much time on Wikipedia reading articles, but all about politics.
Yeah.
I was super interested in politics.
Okay. Yeah.
But I kind of took this libertarian angle, which meant that the responsibility fell on me rather than the state, right? Which kind of led to these more motivational issues.
Okay.
I was very
So,
kind of the brand vision of like, being industrious and doing something, and it's like, well, I'm not that. How do I become that?
Oh, okay. Okay, so yeah, that actually answers one of my questions, because I was wondering, it's like, okay, when you were younger, was what you would be motivated to do pretty much kind of established for you? But it sounds like also there was some influence from your politics there. But I was thinking like, okay, school and church could take off. You could offload a lot of your concern about, okay, what do I do? What's important to school and church?
Yeah, I felt that I had the answer of what to do. I just didn't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I am, I'm crafting a more coherent narrative than I'm sure what happens in reality, right? But
yeah, no, people never make up narratives after the fact, I'm sure.
Yeah,
that's okay. I don't mean to knock it. I think we have to do that.
Like school, like I tested in my 6th grade class. They were doing this kind of experiment where the students would test into either like into math classes, just to like prepare us for junior high, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I tested into, there was like a hard math, a medium math, and like the easy math, and like I tested into the medium math.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't do the homework, and so they put me in the easy math,
mm-hmm.
which was kind of fun because I was the smartest kid in that class.
Yeah.
Right. But that wasn't good for my motivational skills, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't have to try as hard. And then church, is like, there's things you should and shouldn't be doing, and it's like, well, I'm having difficulty with both of those, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, it feels like my whole life this is something that's, I've struggled with. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, but I'm sure that there were other things, like, my social problems were probably a bigger barrier at the time than the motivational issues.
Okay.
In that I wasn't particularly popular or have any problem at all. But yet it's the motivational issue that stuck with me and became my career interest and became like the thing upon which the rest of my career has been based.
And so if hopefully this isn't putting you too much on the spot, but like what have you arrived at as far as a theory of motivation, or do you have like an explanation of your understanding of it? Is that too big of a question to ask immediately, or?
I mean, yes.
I know you've talked about it before, and I've read your stuff on it, but it doesn't immediately come to mind. But
I have a theory that I had been working on from like maybe 2016 to 2018, like kind of 2 years where just kind of on and off I was working on it, trying to think through some issues, and some of the things started to like match up, and it started to form into something. I was like, I think this is right, but there's one major issue with my theory that I don't know how to solve, and it kind of just kills it. And until I figure out how to get around that. So here's is that, motivation is a very broad term. And when I talk about motivation, I'm often talking about a very certain type of motivation, which is sort of this like industriousness. It's in terms of the big 5 personality traits, it's conscientiousness. Like that's what I'm low on. Like when it comes to intellectual curiosities, I'm extremely highly motivated.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But that's a very different kind of motivation, right? So you have, if you think of it in terms of the 5 personality traits, you have at least 5 motivational systems going on, at least, right?
Yeah.
But probably, in the hundreds, you probably have hundreds of different systems going on. Or maybe for every single value, preference, or interest you have a motivational profile of some kind. Like I don't know how to handle that, because when I was thinking just about conscientiousness, I can create this theory. right? And it's, conscientiousness is related to the salience network, and the salience kind of like brings things out. It makes things salient in that it just kind of pops out at you.
Okay.
And I think in terms of like the invisible gorilla experiment.
Yeah.
Right. So in the invisible gorilla experiment, there's some kids and they're wearing white jerseys or black jerseys, and the kids in the white jerseys are passing a ball back and forth, and the kids in the black jerseys are passing a ball back and forth. And the experimenter asks you, we're going to show you this video, count how many times the guys in white jerseys pass the ball back and forth. And so you watch the video and you count and you come up with an answer like, oh, I think it was 23. But halfway through the video, this guy in a gorilla suit walks across the screen, beats his chest, and then walks off screen.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of people don't notice the gorilla, right? And it's like, yeah, because the gorilla is not part of your goal.
Right.
And so if it's not part of your goal, it's like it completely disappears. It's like the air conditioning on in your house, right? You don't notice the air conditioning is on until it turns off.
Yeah.
It's just background noise because it's not part of your goal. Or I also think about it in terms of something like how it feels like your mom always knows where everything is in the house or in the fridge. You're like, I can't find this thing. And she's like, it's right in front of your face. Like,
yes.
How can you not see this, right?
Yeah.
I think almost everyone has this experience. And it's like, well, it's her, like, she has taken it upon her as her responsibility to keep things organized, to know where things are. And so it's part of her goal system. And so these things, they're salient to her. She actually notices where things are. Whereas if you don't take it upon you, if you don't feel that it's your responsibility or part of your goal, everything just kind of disappears. You don't notice these things. Like if you're a master carpenter and you look at a wood carved chair, like you're going to notice all of the little fine details. And I'm just going to notice the chair, right?
It's like me with plastic.
Yes. Yes, the material engineer, right? Just not going to notice those things. They're not going to be salient to me because they're not part of my goal system. And so conscientiousness seems something like that. It's like this: you have a goal, and the things that are related to that goal become salient. That they're not just background noise anymore, but like physically present and emotionally present, such that they take up mental space in your mind. And people in high conscientiousness experience disgust at very high levels. And I think that's part of that same process, where it's like, when you notice something that's goal relevant, such as avoiding disgust things, like it's just very visceral. And so someone who's high in conscientiousness, like that disgust becomes even more visceral. And I think that's what it's like to be high conscientiousness, is that just the things that you have to do become more visceral in this kind of almost emotional sense. Whereas when you're low in conscientiousness, like it's just kind of blah. It's just kind of gray background noise that you don't think about. It's not salient. It's not emotional.
Yeah.
It's just something in the background.
Yeah, it almost seems like a more, I guess a different way of looking at certain epistemological questions, like, okay, how we perceive the world. But that's more kind of looking at us like, okay, how do we know what's going on around us without really looking into, okay, what is it that we're actually trying to do? It's just like, okay, I'm walking through a neighborhood and I see certain things and I notice certain things and my mind has a kind of picture of the way things are. But the way you put it, I like that. Is it's maybe just a different way of looking at it. Is okay, what kind of things am I noticing? What kind of things am I interested in? Rather than what do I perceive or what do I know? So I guess what I'm saying is there's an epistemological approach to things, and then also motivational.
It's a phenomenological, or phenomenological, however you pronounce that.
Right. Yeah.
Things that interest you, right? Like you see Hebrew, you see some language, and it pops out to you. It's interesting. For whatever reason, you have that value and that goal, and it just pops out in the world, and you can't ignore it. And I'm very curious about, like, how is it that those interests form in the first place? But then, like, what is actually going on, and how do you actually do something about it? Like, I'm interested in that whole process.
There was this. how would I even describe him? He's like a historian, I guess. So I listened to these podcasts years and years ago by a Baptist historian named Maxie Birch. He lived in Phoenix back at the time, and so he did these classes at North Phoenix Baptist Church and would record them as a podcast. So anyway, he would do one like on history of Christianity and things like that. And so, but one of the comments he said was that theology is biography. His point being like, okay, if you want to understand Luther's theology, look at his biography, or Augustine or whoever. Anyway, I was just thinking of that now because probably to discern like, okay, why somebody is why somebody has the things that drive them and grab them at any present moment. You kind of have to go back and look at their biography and see how it came about.
Yeah, I think if you had asked me maybe 10 years ago, was it 10 years ago that I was on my mission? What year are we in? So 2010, yeah. So I was about to leave on my mission.
Oh, okay.
I would have poo-pooed that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'm much more keen on that idea now, where it's like, yeah, like religion isn't just a set of doctrine, but it's also this very personal narrative relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's interesting that you say your young missionary self wouldn't have liked that, but you mean, I guess that's it is a little bit more of that is a different perspective than we usually hear, but it doesn't seem directly, or it seems like you could massage that a little bit. So the missionary would, because obviously, like each prophet in the scriptures has their own interest and focus. Like Alma the Younger being very interested in repentance and redemption, and his biography would seem to have a lot of influence on that.
I guess the question is, how do you define theology?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Whereas before I would have been very conservative, be like, theology is this set of doctrine and that doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm like, yeah, theology is kind of inexact, and I don't know, just whatever works, narrative wise.
Yeah.
Just with it.
Yeah. Or partial pictures.
Yeah.
Of a whole. That's the Hegelian in me talking, but.
I'm thinking. Speaking of which, I'm reading this book, or I just read David Brooks' Second Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks. So that book's strange in that the first third is about the second mountain. The second third is, I think, about marriage, and then the last third is about religion.
Yeah.
I feel like only a third of the book was actually about the second.
I felt that way too. I read it as well. I had to push through it a little bit, but I appreciated many of the messages in it. But yeah, it felt a little bit like the organization was a little strange.
Yeah. But one of the things he talks about in it is that, he grew up Jewish and then converted to Christianity. And I can't remember every area where he talked about that, where he felt like he was often a bridge between two worlds,
mm-hmm.
right? He had one foot in Judaism and one foot in Christianity, and that creates this sort of, what is it, thesis, antithesis,
antithesis and synthesis. Uh-huh.
This, right? He doesn't. I don't remember him saying it in those terms.
Yeah.
But yeah, you get these values from one side and the other.
Yeah.
Always trying to figure out like how does it all come together. Anyways, that reminded me.
I'm a big fan of that. Those are the type of things that I look for. I wouldn't say necessarily that I know that it's some deep structure of reality, but it seems like a very useful tool to try and push through ideas and see where their limits are, and find opposing ideas, and where you can find the utility or truth of both. Total, not exactly related, but I was just remembering a part of that book that I got a kick out of. Have you finished reading it, by the way? Okay, so there's a part where like he's telling his kind of spiritual autobiography, and then he like comes to a point where he says, and then that is when I accepted and let Jesus Christ into my life, or something like that. And then it's like a little pause, and well, not quite, but but it's funny. But then he's like, but almost, you know.
Yeah.
I appreciated his humor at that part.
Since I read that, I've been thinking about it a lot, and because that's kind of how I feel. But I often feel like I have one foot in Mormonism and one foot in atheism, for example, or that I have one foot in a very rational worldview and one foot in a more romantic worldview.
Yeah.
And I feel like I do that as partially intentionally, but also just kind of occurs. But I prefer it. I having that constant tension, I think, is incredibly liberating, and it's beautiful in a way. That it's not just like being able to come to an easy answer when you have just like, you know, like it's the hedgehog versus the fox, and the Isaiah Berlin example, right? The fox knows many things, the hedgehog only knows one, right?
Yeah, right.
And so it's like having that, knowing many different ways of looking at the world and trying to figure out how it all fits together, and identifying those conflicts and actually focusing on them. I think there's incredible value in that.
Yeah. I wrote a blog post on my infrequently posted to blog called Atheism in the Service of Theology, kind of in this idea that you can get some insights from atheism and atheist thinkers. So like John Gray's one that I read a lot. Yeah, I feel like there are partial truths there. And so, yeah, I don't want to shut myself off to it. I mean, I don't consider myself an atheist by any means, but anyway, it's interesting. And I guess, well, part of my understanding of God, or at least one understanding, is this kind of maximal existence. You know, the I am that I am. But I feel like you can only really understand that if you try and think of its negation as well, like of non-existence and non-being, or what it means for there to be a universe without a transcendent order. That's important to consider to really understand what either one would mean, right? So anyway, I guess I'm just saying that I really do appreciate having, one foot in each of those, or you know, hopscotching back and forth between them.
I'll draw a distinction between understanding the opposing view and like partially endorsing the opposing.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm sort of endorsing a cognitive dissonance. Almost,
yeah.
Right. Although you could also use a more friendly term and just say, like, you're talking in probability, right? Like you don't know which one is true, so you believe both, right?
So quickly, for my benefit, so like cognitive dissonance, like in a technical sense, would be like a kind of distress. Is that correct? Is it more than just an intellectual response?
I don't know if that stress is an explicit part of the definition.
Okay.
But maybe it is. Let me see what it says. The state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes, especially as relating to behavioral decisions and attitude change.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll totally embrace that.
Yeah, yeah. I got called out for being for having dissonance once when I was like, this isn't dissonance, it's basic probability theory.
Yeah, yeah,
And ever since then, it's like, okay, what exactly does it mean to have dissonance?
yeah. Oh, yeah. If that's all it is, then I'm like, okay, fine. Sure.
How to
I love cognitive dissonance. That's the best.
defend it a bit. I think it's
Yeah, yeah.
have that tension. I recently posted that Phil Tetlock quote. I've actually got it right here. Um, he says, when your values are more lopsided, it's easier to engage in what we call simpler modes of cognitive dissonance reduction, like denial or bolstering and spreading of the alternatives. So downplay one value, push up the other value, and make your life stress-free. But some ideological positions at some points in history require more tolerance for dissonance, and some people are more inclined to fill those roles.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't see as I endorse it as long as it's like self-conscious and
Yes.
accepting. Like, okay, yeah. I mean, if you're denying that there's a contradiction, that or just not noticing or not realizing, then that's less than ideal, right? But if you're at least are aware of it and understand the contradictions and just kind of say, okay, haven't found a way to resolve that yet, but I'm thinking about it. I don't see anything wrong with that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I fully believe that there are I experience cognitive dissonance in that I don't know how all of my beliefs and values cohere into one coherent whole. Like that's not a reasonable thing to have or to expect someone to have, rather.
Yeah.
But consciously realizing that this is the case, and then trying to figure it out and trying to understand, like, yes, I do have these opposing, trying to figure out where those tensions are, I think is, I guess for people like us that are so very engaged with ideas and like ideas, which I mean as a personality trait and not as an intelligence thing.
Yeah.
I think that's an incredibly fun and engaging thing to do.
Sure. And for me, I'm kind of like, I see it more as a state of my own knowledge, rather than necessarily it's probably not applicable to reality itself. Like, I do think there is coherence. There is ultimately coherence to everything. But it's just whether I mean, maybe in certain isolated fields we can get that coherence, but even if we can't ever access it, it's kind of through the contradictions that we get a little bit closer. Is my thought anyway. That if you just restrict yourself to one approach to reality or to any field, that's going to limit you. But if you look at more pieces of it, and notice those contradictions, even as you see the contradictions proliferate, you're actually getting closer to the eventual coherence, even if you never quite reach it. But that's kind of a matter of faith on my part. But
yeah, I think it's incredibly likely that the universe is coherent in that way, and that it's in our mind and not in the world. This is reminding me that Joseph Smith has that quote, by proving contraries, truth is made manifest.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I totally buy into that.
Yeah. I was trying to explain this to some friends the other day, and it was like the best I could come up with is like, the early bird gets the worm and the second rat gets the cheese are both true statements.
Right.
Just not. Just because there seems to be conflict at the surface doesn't mean it is. And so trying to find that conflict is where that truth is going to be made manifest.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that touches on another thing that we've discussed a lot, right? Which is kind of the discomfort with pragmatism. And the best label I could think of is that I'm kind of a Straussian about a lot of this stuff. Like, how I was saying, yeah, I do have this trust in there being answers um, to all things, even if I can't access them, right? And that's I mean, with the Straussian idea, it's kind of specific to politics, but like could be a lot of things. So like values, like okay, can we know if there is an objective value to a certain thing, or can we prove the way things actually are? Well, maybe from our point of view, we're not really able to do that. You know, we have limitations, um, but I do ultimately think there is, yeah, that it's there. You know, that there is objectivity that constrains our experience. That you know, it's the things that when we push, that push back. Um, but a lot of it really does come down to kind of a matter of faith. And you know, I guess I could say I'm a religious person, so I have no problem saying that. But even in anything, it's some type of matter of faith and trusting that okay, all of this is working towards something real.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about I think therefore I am, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only thing you can state that's just like self-evidently true, like everything else is an axiom,
right,
or a conclusion of some kind. Like,
yeah,
I've been thinking about this. It's like, how far can you actually get from that, right? You can say, like, I think, therefore I am. Like, we may be in a simulation, maybe like everyone else doesn't think. Like 1,000 other things could be true. I could be massively wrong about, everything. But like this, I know, like I know that I am because I can experience. How far beyond that can you actually get? Like you can't get to science from that. Like everything seems after that point.
I don't know if you can get to anything beyond that.
I don't. Well, I mean, you can say something like I have preferences. Like, I think that's kind of self-evidently true. And so, in a sense, I think
I could see that
even more essential, more fundamental than reality, or more philosophically grounded than our understanding of reality. That ought is more grounded than is in many ways.
That's a very interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah, almost an odd philosopher, and someone's going to take issue with that. Well, of the 5 I can listen to this, maybe they won't, but. And then you can also say something like agency, I think, which is that, like, I think therefore I am, I have preferences, and I can act in such a way to satisfy those preferences. Like all 3 of those things are self-evidently true to me. Like you could try and argue against them, but like I don't know how you even could argue against them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Descartes would just say that if the evil demon's messing with your reasoning, what were the 3 again? Is I think therefore I am, and then I have preferences, and I try to
I can act in such a way that at least seems.
Oh yeah. Well, okay, yeah. I guess
that would be the sneak. Right?
I guess it would be in the actual reasoning to the realization of the preferences that the demon would get you. But yeah, just positing those 3, I think that would be. Seems like that should be pretty safe.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was thinking. So this is a little bit tangential as well, but on the Oziet idea, and I guess an ought being quite fundamental. So, phenomenologically, taking ourselves as subjects, I do think ought is quite prominent, right? I mean, it's probably. I mean, it's even more basic than the understanding of the world in the scientific way, because that's stuff that we either, for most of us, we get by what we're taught, or that we get from experiment and infer. But I also find it fascinating because, I keep coming back to thinking, okay, well, maybe a telos or an ought is just when there's a thinking subject. Okay, that seems like a reasonable idea, and I don't think that's a problem necessarily. It wouldn't bother me because I am one. But then I also think, okay, I look at nature, and in many cases, other than somebody being there to say like, okay, yeah, this is desirable, or yes, this is the goal, it does seem that nature has direction. So interestingly enough, evolution is the one I always come to. So for example, an organism has organs that at least in its present state. So like a bird has a wing. A wing is supposed to fly. A heart is supposed to pump blood. All these phenotypes have their functions, and if they don't perform those functions, then they are not selected to perpetuate. And I think I remember Darwin said he regretted using the word selection because it seems too directed, but it just seems so correct. I don't know what other word you would use. Although I get the idea of trying to take out any type of agency behind it, but I don't know. Can you think of a way to take out preferring, I don't know, like a functioning heart over a non-functioning heart, or such examples in evolution?
Yeah, I think the philosophical problem is right in that there's not really a solid philosophical way to draw an ought from an is.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that that's a real philosophical problem that we just can't.
Somebody has to come along and say, "Oh yeah, I value that." Right. I mean, somebody has to make that choice.
But I feel like the problem is like that it feels like almost like a language game, and that they're saying like, can morality exist? Like, okay, define morality.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this it's tautological, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's you're kind of already assuming a conclusion when you say morality or good or ought. Like, you're already assuming something with those words. But okay, so besides that, I think the philosophical problem, it might be just a language thing, but perhaps it really is. But I don't know, it's kind of just also a pragmatic problem, right? Where it's like, we kind of basically agree on most things. Yeah, there's some edge cases where we're quite different, but like, no one doubts like medicine is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Medicine isn't science, or rather, it can be science. You can treat medicine as a scientific issue, but when you go to the hospital and the doctor treats you, that's not science.
Yeah, the application of it. Yeah, deciding. How to use it.
And the doctor is saying, I believe that your heart should beat for 80 years.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to do that, I think you have a problem, and I'm going to fix it.
Right.
I think this is what we ought to do. And no one questions that.
Yeah.
Right. No one questions it about biology.
Right.
It's a little bit, the further you get from biology, the more questionable it gets. But even in biology, I have a lot of, at least online friends that think that 80 years is way too little, and that hearts should never stop beating. That people should be able to live for, like deaths should be done away with, right?
Right. Yeah.
So even there, like, obviously medicine isn't clear cut, but I take that as kind of an indication, like, if we can do it in medicine, why are we so hesitant to do it elsewhere? Like we've crossed the is-ought gap, and no one is saying, doctor, you can't treat him because that would be crossing the is-ought gap, and that's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, right. Well, so I mean, obviously, right. I mean, it doesn't bother us practically, right? I mean, even if we can't derive values from an objective state of affairs, we don't care, you know. we have the values, and we're going to continue to value what we do. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm not. There aren't people who would. Are there people who are just like, oh, who, whatever, you know? Wait, there's no use in valuing anything. I mean, I'm sure there are some people, but
In terms of physical health, I don't know of anyone. In terms of cognitive health, yes.
Like, what do you mean?
So Brian Kaplan has famously argued that mental illness, like, basically doesn't exist.
Oh, okay.
So, for example, like an alcoholic prefers alcohol. Who are you to say that preference?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Like, he prefers the alcohol above his family. He prefers it above a job, and like, so what? Like, that's his choice.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, but yeah, that seems a little inconsistent with, because we have no problem asserting preferences in other areas, where, yeah, I mean, if yeah, that's true. We've already crossed. It seems like that's relying on saying, oh, okay, you know, values are things that we make up, so therefore they're not legitimate to impose. But we already do it in so many other areas. So in a way, you could kind of just suspend the question of, okay, where do we get these values? Where do they come from? That's meta ethics, but yeah, in terms of ethics, I don't think there's much of a case there.
Brian Kaplan, and he borrows his argument from a guy called Saz, who is like the thorn in psychiatry's side. Always, he's and to be clear, like, something that's not clear, like a personality disorder. Like, when you're saying someone has a personality disorder, you're not saying like there's something, because with a heart, you're saying like a heart should beat, a heart ought to beat
right
80 years, and if it doesn't do that, we have an issue, and we're going to solve it.
Yeah, right.
With a personality disorder, we're saying a person should act a certain way, and you are not doing that. Therefore, something is wrong with you.
Yeah.
And you're not saying that the organ isn't working right. You're saying there's something wrong with your preferences.
Mm-hmm.
Like, your preferences are wrong. They don't line up with what I think or what society thinks your preferences should be.
Yeah.
Like, that's extremely sketchy.
Yeah, that's a much harder question. Yeah.
But at the same time, if you've ever spent any time with someone with a personality disorder, you're like, yeah, this guy needs treatment.
Yeah.
I had a roommate that had a personality disorder, and like, that really screwed with me. Like, I can't talk to the guy anymore. I had to completely cut him out of my life. It's like, you know, like, yes, he had his preferences. He wanted to be a certain way, and he found, you know, being that way was better than not being that way.
Yeah.
But I want to change his preferences, and I'm willing to do that through medication. And like, it's extremely sketch to, you know, it should make you uncomfortable. I still think we should do it.
Yeah, you know, this I'll have to make note. I'm thinking of like a cross between Foucault and MacIntyre. Unfortunately, only MacIntyre is still alive, so we can't do it in real life. But both of them have a similar idea, which is basically that there is a social construction of the ideal person, more or less. I mean, I'm kind of forcing those together, but they have positive and negative views of that. Or I guess with Foucault, it'd be more like, okay, it's a caution, right? That we have this understanding of what the ideal person should be like, and that is a potential for oppression, because and limitations of freedom, right? Because once you define what the ideal person should be, anybody who doesn't fit that or doesn't want to fit into that ideal, society is going to limit their freedoms to express themselves as they would want. McIntyre has also an understanding that the ideal of what a person should be, man as he would be if he realized his telos and that big hyphenated concept there, is also defined by narrative, by community, and that you really can't have ethics without that, or at least you can't have a coherent ethics without that. And in a way, I think Foucault might agree with that, but he'd be like, so what? That's good. So yeah, I'll have to think about that. That's an interesting, could be an interesting correspondence.
The other, besides personality disorder, another one is ADHD, right? Where ADHD is a disorder dependent on the context that the person is in, not the person, right? Okay. So ADHD is a spectrum, right? You can be extremely ADHD where you're having a hard time focusing, drawn to other things all the time, or you could be the opposite of ADHD, which is like you're extremely focused, just, laser-like focus, basically. Yeah. And like, neither of those things are good or bad in and of themselves. Yeah. It's just on your goals and the things that you want to do, right? And so ADHD is a disorder for a culture where education is taught by sitting down in a classroom and being taught by a person for 8 hours, right? Like in the elementary school system, or 6 teachers if you're in junior high school. Like, so ADHD isn't a disorder in that it's an objective way that the brain has screwed up. It just doesn't match up with society's goals. Yeah.
Yeah, and that seems like one where maybe some diversity and educational settings might help out a bit.
Yeah, definitely. I also just, I don't know, personally, I think I want to take some ADHD medicine. I think it would help.
Yeah.
So like,
but do you think there's stuff you would lose from that?
What's that?
Would you lose something in your personality or your life by doing that?
I think so, because you got to think about it kind of evolutionarily speaking, that if there is a spectrum, it's because that spectrum has been useful in the evolutionary past.
Right, yeah.
Supposedly. There's some arguments that, not everything that evolution develops is, functional.
Right, yeah, it might have been just not detrimental enough to be selected out.
Yes.
But otherwise random.
Yeah, but like ADHD, like you can imagine like someone on, the plains of Africa constantly not able to focus and looking around at the horizon. That may have been the person that prevented the lion attacks.
Yeah.
And then I remember there was a theory that I heard a long time ago about that it's the people with ADHD that settle new territories, basically. The further you get away from Africa, the more ADHD there is. Or
interesting.
The newer the civilization, the more ADHD. So, like the southernmost tip in South America, which is like the most recently settled, has the highest rates of ADHD.
Interesting.
I'm not sure how true that is, but you can imagine.
Sounds good, regardless.
Where
it should be true.
But yeah, I mean, you can imagine situations in which having that spectrum is useful, but it's not quite as clear how being not focused is useful. Although, going back to what we talked about originally, the default mode network, maybe ADHD people are better acting in the default mode network, and that they can, or maybe not. Maybe it's the opposite. I'm not
Well,
sure.
it sounds, yeah, I mean, it sounds like being able to accommodate all of those differences would be, or is difficult and potentially expensive. I mean, in a sense, we do it now, right? I mean, just by having services for people with ADHD or autism, you know, we're making accommodations rather than just doing nothing. You know, and so there's a cost, at least an upfront cost to society and time and effort that goes into that. It seems like a good thing, but yeah, it's more complicated, I guess.
Yeah, there's no one size fits all, which is something we've talked about quite a bit. Which is like anytime you give advice, anytime you have sort of an institution that's trying to form people, anytime you're trying to tell people what to do or how to do it, like you're gonna screw up someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The advice is not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know. That's something that I think you just kind of have to struggle with, where it's like,
yeah,
you're always going to screw up someone if you give advice, but I think you have to give advice. Now,
yeah.
Some people may disagree with me. I think Jeff particularly has disagreed with me on this point about giving advice. I watched a talk or a conversation between Agnes Callard and Ayelet Fishbach on YouTube 2 days ago, and Agnes Callard was very much against giving advice.
Okay.
Although I felt her position was incoherent in that, because her opinion is basically like, you don't know anyone well enough to give them advice specific to them. But then later on, she says something to the effect of, people don't take your advice seriously anyways, or if they do, it's because they recognize in your advice something that they already wanted to do.
So where do I know Agnes Callard from? I know I've heard the name.
A philosopher at University of Chicago.
Okay.
I really like her. I just ordered her book, Aspiration.
Okay.
Which you might be interested in.
Cool.
And it's very relevant to this conversation as well, where it's,
sort of something I was just thinking about. This is something that happened today. So my daughters were playing, and they were just playing with some figurines or something. And my younger daughter was like, "Oh, let's go get married." And then the older daughter was like, "Oh, but we're both boys, and boys don't get married." And I was thinking, I wonder where she picked that up from. And then I thought, well, of course, she's probably never seen two men or two women get married. I mean, we have someone in the family who is, but she probably doesn't know yet. But it was just interesting to me, like I mean, you just pick up what is kind of most common, what you see around you. And there's not even anything necessarily, intentionally exclusive about it. But going back to your idea of whenever you give advice, you're trying to, kind of give some type of norm for people to follow. You're just going to go off of what you know, what you see. And it's not going to work for everyone, even if it works for most people. So, I guess that's just something that has to be kept in mind. I mean, Dallin H. Oakes has even said that, not quite to that degree of liberality, but basically, that you take the general principles and figure out, what applies to you and what doesn't.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we are both, as a culture, too moralistic, but also too scared to prescribe.
Yeah, that's an interesting combo, isn't it?
Yeah, it's both at the same time, and I don't quite know how to think about it, or because I'll think, it's so easy to think in terms of left and right, even though I don't. I think it's an it's a bad abstraction. It's not
Yeah.
it's not quite concise enough.
Mm-hmm. It automatically puts people on the defensive.
Yeah. Yes, that too. But the left can be like on Twitter, we'll say the left on Twitter can be too moralistic, too condemning,
Right.
but also just like, oh, you do you, don't let anyone tell you what to do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And then on the right, and I'll kind of phrase this more in terms of the libertarian right, because I think it's a little bit easier for me. They can be moralistic about what should be done, how we should do it, but also like, oh, you can't tell people what to do.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking of this in particular in terms of the phrase, the pursuit of happiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have these inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I always found that interesting, that the pursuit of happiness, that it's this kind of this vague phrase. It's not saying here's how to achieve happiness.
Yeah.
It's saying like, I don't know what happiness is for you, so you can pursue it however you want. That's what that right is. It's like, I don't know the correct way of being, so I'm not going to prescribe anything. I'm just going to leave it up to you, and you can kind of figure out what's best for you. But then within the culture, you kind of have to have these ways of being. You have to have man as he ought to be if you realize his telos, or however it is, right? Like you have some kind of vision of how things ought to be, or because that's where all the value is, right? Like there's no value in just saying you can't, like in the negative, in the libertarian sense of like the only rules in libertarianism are like you can't do these things, right? Like you can't punch someone, you can't do this, but like there's no value there.
Yeah.
That's not where value is found. Value is found when you actually go and do something. But libertarianism doesn't have that, right? It's the lack of a positive prescriptive vision of what you're supposed to do. But you need that vision, and like you're going to get that from your culture. You're going to get that from like your elders, and like traditionally, like when people need advice, like they would go to their elders. We as culture don't treat our elders quite so well, but
right, yeah. And that might be a problem. Not that I can assign blame to one side or the other, but I mean the curious mixture of being like both at once hyper judgmental and then also like afraid of moralizing at all. It seems like it's like insufficient. Just not sufficiently thought through, right? Like
there's an insufficient moral vocabulary.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's like everything is just good or bad. And it's like, well, no, not even close. Like there's things that are just like.
Yeah, I mean, I probably the only way I could think through that is be like, okay, well, let's talk about why, but that gets kind of scary, right? Because in a certain sense, you don't want to open up all of those cans of worms because there are really strong values like, okay, we're not going to do lynchings, we're not going to do genocide, well, why? Okay, we probably maybe we should go there, but we still want to come back on with the right answer, right? We don't want to make any allowance for those things. So at least if we're going to err on one side, I would say, okay, leave those alone. But in the case of like, okay, well, why do we get really judgmental, in this call out of somebody appropriating something from another culture or not being humble enough when being an ally? But then on the other hand, we say, you do you, if a man wants to wear, or a boy wants to wear a dress to school or something. Seems like those are cases where we would say, okay, well, why are we reacting the way that we're reacting? in those instances. And maybe if we thought through them a little bit more, we could kind of
like
figure out.
Good bad framework doesn't apply to the boy wearing a dress. Like that's not the right moral framework.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's about social norms so much as it is about anything, not about good and
bad.
Or the other example.
Well, maybe, right? I mean, some people might think of that as a bad thing, but I guess that's the thing to analyze.
Yeah, but I was thinking about it in terms of like, if someone is gonna wear an Armani suit down a really dangerous part of Philadelphia, I'd be like, you're a moron. Right? And I would be very comfortable saying that. But if a girl was wearing something scandalous and walking down that same part of town, I would be much more hesitant to say anything.
Right.
Because now there's this element of good, bad, and this cultural war element. And like, I don't know how to handle that. Because when you say you want to be able to tell someone like what you're wearing isn't appropriate for the context you're going into and puts you in danger.
Right.
That's not a moral statement.
Right.
But if everyone is interpreting it in terms of that framework of good and bad, or like you're a bad person or you deserve what you get, like that's not at all what I'm trying to say, right?
Yeah.
So like that more like that nuance. There's more than just good and bad. There's so much more to that conversation than good and bad. And I don't think we have the link.
That's an interesting point. That sometimes we moralize things that really don't need to be moralized. So like I'm thinking of your example of like, somebody walking into a situation dressed a certain way that could lead to certain consequences. We don't have to moralize that to, and people could interpret it as being a moralized statement where it wasn't intended to be, and that can, I can see how that would lead to people being upset. That's a very interesting point. I mean, it seems like if there's not when we say something's moral or immoral, there's some type of judgment on the character, right? Like, you're
generally like there's usually some sort of framework in which and this is I think a way of thinking that you've kind of brought me around to seeing is that good and bad are terms relative to some moral framework, right? Going back to the Aesop problem, you can't just say good and bad just as such. Like there needs to be some sort of axioms, some sort of coherent framework in which you are judging these things, which I don't think is problematic, but it is problematic in that you don't always know which moral framework to use.
Yeah.
So when you're
but I'll just say real quick that could even be like maybe there is some absolute single transcendent moral framework, but that would still apply, right? There could be like a God's eye view.
But even if it is so, we don't really know.
Right, we don't know what that is exactly, but
And oftentimes when we're talking about good and bad, we often mean something more like within this particular moral framework to achieve the thing that we are trying to achieve within this moral framework, this is not instrumental to that end.
Yeah.
And so when you have the boy wearing the dress to school, you say like within a particular framework, this doesn't match up, it doesn't align.
Yeah.
But that's one framework, and you can say, but you don't have to adopt that framework.
Right.
Like you can use a different framework. That's not to say this framework that everyone else is using that says this isn't right. That doesn't mean like that moral framework is evil. But if it doesn't work for you and it prevents you from that pursuit of happiness of how you define it, like then that is a problematic and you need a new framework. And like good and bad doesn't capture that.
Yeah. Now, does that I guess that in unresolved situation, like that you can't, or at least that we don't know how to come down on a single answer for those type of things, is that Is that disturbing? Like I said, so like, well, I'm thinking back to, so like on our last Salt River expedition when you said like you really don't like pragmatism. You don't want to be a pragmatist, even if you end up having to be. But do you still feel that way?
For the most part, yes.
Yeah.
People justify too much with pragmatism, I feel like.
Okay, interesting. So we might be thinking of slightly different things. But so what type of things would people justify with it?
So I'm also thinking of this in terms of like instrumental rationality versus epistemic rationality.
Right.
Which is a common debate in rationalist circles, right? Where it's like the rationalists who favor epistemic rationality say, I just want to know how the world actually is.
Okay.
Regardless of whether that's good for me or not, I want to know how it actually is. And the instrumental rationalists say, yeah, but that's secondary. You only care about how the world is so that you can have a good life. That's the only reason you care.
Yeah.
And the epistemic rationalists say, no, I actually do. Like even if the truth were so depressing, I'd kill myself. Like I'd want to know it, basically.
Okay.
And the instrumental rationalists often end up with strange beliefs. They don't prioritize skepticism, right? I mean, that's kind of almost by definition what pragmatism is. It's like you're saying, yeah, we can't know, but I'm going to be pragmatic anyways. Where a skeptic says, no, I'm just going to withhold belief. The pragmatists say, no, I'm going to kind of take that little bit of leap of faith. I'm going to take that axiom. I'm going to run with it and see where it leads me. And that often leads to almost magical beliefs.
Okay.
Some of the community. And if not quite magical, maybe one step below that.
Yeah.
Or something like Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is very much of the pragmatist tradition, or considers himself part of the pragmatist tradition. And talks about things. Anyways, Jordan Peterson, this whole thing.
Yeah.
He's not always the most rational, skeptical person. Like he has some strange beliefs, and I think part of it stems from that sort of pragmatic approach to truth.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I guess there are some there's some variation within pragmatism. So I think of like John Dewey, who I was just reading, where his more isn't more like so I guess William James, another pragmatist, he had said like, okay, we are justified in believing certain things even without some threshold of evidence. So and he's pretty well known for that. And but John Dewey, I would say, had a different emphasis, which was more like scientific method, that the way we know things is by action. So the way to understand the world is by going out and forcing it to respond, to give up its secrets, right? So by experiment, you can't just passively look at the world, or that doesn't make sense. You can't just passively receive the sense perception from the world to understand it. You actually have to go out and do something. And so that's the practice part of pragmatics. And so his type of pragmatism I wouldn't consider at all unscientific. In fact, I'd say it's very much empirical and in line with the scientific method. He just doesn't make any claim beyond experiment, right? So basically, like, okay, all you can claim is what you observe. We did this, and this was the result, and we can operate. And I don't know if this is Dewey so much, but this is kind of my rephrasing, that we can posit certain laws and tenets, patterns that we see, and that they work well when we use them. And that seems like a good scientific approach, like Newton's law of gravitation was working really well. It wasn't we know it's not the ultimate law because it has been superseded, but say somebody pre-Einstein could have said, well, okay, Newton's law of gravitation probably not complete, but seems to work quite well. And now with relativity, probably not complete as well, but it seems like a closer approximation. But I guess it's less of a concern about not having the final solution, but still being very scientific. I wouldn't want to endorse anything that excuses sloppy thinking or indulges belief in things that just don't make sense.
I think it's always a scale, right? Like, and this is, I think I may have posted about this, I can't remember, but like there's always two different goals that you have. There's finding truth and rejecting falsehood.
Mm-hmm.
And those are two very different goals.
Yeah.
In statistics, it's sensitivity and specificity, which are terms that are very important for understanding that Yondes paper, the Santa Clara study, and understanding false positives.
Oh, okay. So I'm not familiar with that. Can you just describe that a little bit? The sensitivity and the what was the other one?
Sensitivity. So say you are trying to detect whether someone is infected. Sensitivity, if your test is very sensitive, that means you are very accurate at identifying when that person has the disease.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Specificity is being very accurate in detecting when a person does not have that disease.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So sensitivity when they have it, specificity when they don't.
Yes.
Okay.
You can have 100% sensitive test. Like it's very easy to have a accurate test, quote unquote, by just diagnosing everyone with the disease. That's
right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Every single person that has the disease. You don't care about just who has the disease. You also care about who doesn't.
Who doesn't? Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
Right. And so these two goals, we often mix them up, but they're actually very different. Mm-hmm. It's very important to know whether you're searching for truth or trying to reject falsehood. And so the skeptics, so both of these are scales of how they're not contradictory. You can be high on both. You can be low on both, high on one, low on the other, however it is, right?
Right.
And so, people who consider themselves skeptics, they're higher and they're saying, I want proof of something before I believe it, say in God, right? But they've also already adopted certain axioms in order to get to the point where they can trust science, right?
Right.
100% skeptic, because 100% skepticism would be like, if I can't justify it, then I'm not going to believe it.
Yeah, so you wouldn't believe in anything science says.
Yeah, you would say, I think, therefore I am, and I can't go beyond that.
Right.
That would be true skepticism.
Yeah, because just cause and effect is out the window.
Yeah. So you need, but how far beyond that are you willing to go?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the constant question is okay, am I okay being wrong?
Yeah.
With relativity, for example, right? You're like, how okay am I with if this is wrong? And the pragmatists say, I'm kind of okay with that. Mm-hmm. If relativity doesn't end up being the ultimately true theory, it's a close enough approximation that I'm okay with that.
Right. Yeah, and that's an interesting point. Relativity is kind of a good example here. So I doubt that there's ever going to be an instance where I actually have to use relativity for anything. I mean, who knows? Maybe if I'm working on satellites or anything, but probably not. So for me, it would just be an intellectual appreciation, just I like knowing how things work. Yeah. And so in that case, it's a little bit less pragmatic to directly, right? Because I'm not actually trying to do anything with it. It's just an appreciation. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, and I guess I keep coming back to just being self-conscious about a lot of that, right? Because so, for example, I really like philosophy of science. I think it's something that a lot of people should study, just to not to be skeptical of science. That's not something I would want to encourage at all. But to have a greater appreciation for the nature of science and its limitations and boundaries, because I think that's just a fuller understanding, right? Understanding what you're assuming and just being okay with that. So that way, rather than having this suppressed or implicit assumption, like, oh, if you just go along the assumption that causality is a thing, that cause and effect follow each other. Well, if you analyze that and realize, oh wow, I've been assuming that this whole time, and I guess I'm okay with that. That's a fuller understanding than one would have had previously, and I think a richer understanding. So I guess like I'm fine with skepticism, but I would just want it to be part of a fuller picture, with all your assumptions laid out. To an extent, I don't expect that everyone's going to be super rigorous in everything that they're thinking about. But, if it's something that you're interested in or following.
You have to, at some point, just say, I'm going to accept this axiom. Like, I'm okay with, like, in the medicine, we were talking about earlier, right? Like, we're okay treating diseases. Like, we're okay just, like, accepting the axiom that people should live longer than a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
Less than another amount of time. Like, we like people to live more than 70 years, but less than 200 years, right?
Yeah.
Like, perfectly okay accepting that. And like, those are kind of weird axioms that are, they're kind of naturalistic fallacy, but like, we can't just accept it. We're okay with that.
Right.
Very different than not even being aware of those assumptions in the first place.
I keep thinking back to Jordan Peterson since you mentioned him, but I really appreciated reading Carl Jung. What was the book I read of his? What I appreciated about him was that he seemed very, very self-aware of the, I guess, kind of metaphorical nature of a lot of his ideas. Man in Search of a Soul was the one I read. My cousin recommended that one to me. My lit crit cousin. But maybe my impression, more so than Freud, Carl Jung seemed to understand, like, okay, these archetypes that I'm positing, I'm not necessarily saying that these are things that actually have been, are transmitted genetically or from mind to mind or exist through multiple minds, but they're useful models, and I appreciated that. He seemed a little bit more scientific and self-conscious in his approach. I guess I understand the avoidance there, right? That the kind of magical thinking, like, I could see it coming up in religion a lot. Like, okay, going back to James, like, okay, I see, like, well, this believing this makes me happy, works well for my life, so I'm just going to roll with it. I could see that. I guess I don't really like that, except to the extent that you can say, you're aware of the uncertainty. I used to say, like I have a testimony of Christianity, but I'm aware of the implausibility of certain things. My degrees of belief in certain things. So I think that's a little different than just saying, well, I'm just going to believe what I want. That seems that's a little too simplistic for my taste.
Yeah, accepting Christianity as a noble lie and just kind of like going with it type thing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No. Right. I'm not. So actually, interesting that you bring up the noble lie. So I was studying a little bit of Strauss a little bit ago, and one of his ideas is that philosophers would have to give like a hidden message in their text, so they basically have to lie in their upfront meaning. So Strauss proposed that I think Spinoza and Maimonides had done this a lot in their writing, because their real message, their esoteric message, was too subversive and upsetting. And also Plato had even said in the Republic, that there have to be noble lies that are told. I think one interpretation of Strauss is that he kind of endorsed that idea, or the noble lie idea that we should deliberately deceive for the greater good. I don't know if that's true. I'm not familiar enough with his writing to be able to make a judgment on that. But what the idea that I like is rather that rather than a noble lie, there's a going along with a belief that we can't prove, and that's critical. So it was like one of Strauss's ideas was, philosophy cannot provide a sure foundation for the state. Basically, you apply Cartesian skepticism to anything, including politics, it dismantles it. You're not able to provide some firm foundation. But religion has proclamations on those type of things, and so and we have acceptance of morality and law, even though we can't prove them. So my take is more, rather than there being a noble lie of promulgating Christianity because I think that it will make society function better. My view would be more, Christianity seems to be quite plausible to me, and I think that is true, even though I can't prove it. So that's a different thing, right? And I don't have to lie to say that.
Yeah, it's sort of an admission that at the foundation of everything above the Cartesian level of complete skepticism is based in faith at some level. Like everything above that has faith as its foundation. I'm reminded of Lehi's dream and the building without foundations, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, well, like everything doesn't have foundations, right?
Yeah.
Everything is just based on faith. Mm-hmm. Perhaps there actually is some kind of what are the two theories of truth? There's coherence
and correspondence.
And correspondence, right? So maybe there's some correspondence between our faith and what actually is. Maybe just true belief is the actual foundation.
Uh-huh.
But I tend to think of reality really is, or all of our knowledge, all of our beliefs are more like the building without a foundation. Mm-hmm. And you just kind of have to accept that and be like, yep, it's based on faith. Mm-hmm. Like science is kind of just based on faith as well. Like,
yeah,
it's levels of faith, and like how much faith are you willing to, how much skepticism and seekingness and faith are you like really willing and able to endorse? Like that varies very much from person to person.
Yeah. I was I'm trying to think of where I heard this analogy. I'll have to look around. But anyway, as far as like building up a world view, you could build it up like a skyscraper or like a pyramid. So a skyscraper would be like, you have one firm base and you build everything on top of that. It's a rock solid connection, and it's not going to come down. But if it does, the whole thing's gone. Whereas with a pyramid, it's very spread out, and you have a lot supporting it from many different directions. And if one part of it gets weaker, there's a lot of other support in other places. It's kind of similar to a metaphor by Quine of a web of belief, where you can redistribute the force that it's bearing. That if one part of your worldview starts to become shakier, you can reallocate things and move it around.
So it's like increasing skepticism the higher up the pyramid you get, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is also reminding me, I meant to bring it up earlier, but Sam Harris, because he famously believes that there can be a science of values.
Yes. The moral landscape.
Moral landscape, yeah.
Yeah.
One thing he talks about is the suffering is the same for everyone, right? Like what is bad for everyone, but what is good for one person isn't necessarily good for everyone. And so that's part of the importance of like the pursuit of happiness, right? Is that like what is good for you isn't necessarily good for everyone. So you have to have enough.
Yeah.
But we can at least agree that some things are really bad, and so inside that like gone, like
yeah,
not allowed, right?
Yeah, I'm sympathetic. Speaking of Sam Harris, I'm sympathetic to his ethics. I mean, I think I actually I attended an event at ASU where they brought in a ton of people, and I hadn't even heard of a lot of these people at the time. But then as I got more familiar, I was like, wow, that was a rock star event. So Sam Harris was there, and they brought in Peter Singer, Simon Blackburn, Peter Singer. No, I mentioned him already. Steven Pinker, Patricia Churchland. Gosh, who else was there? Those are the main ones I remember. But anyway, Simon Blackburn was just like totally trying to tear down. Well, he made some very valid criticisms of Harris's book. But I guess my thought of it is kind of like, as an ethics, it seems fine. It doesn't seem like as far as trying to move into a meta ethics, I don't think it really works. But okay, that's fine. Maybe he just said it should have been explicit that wasn't what he was interested in doing. He kind of said like he thought that was boring or something in one part of his book. I'm trying to remember exactly what he said. But yeah, I mean, I don't think in practice, I don't think there's anyone who would disagree that how is it he puts it that a state of maximal suffering of all beings in the universe would be something undesirable. Well, yeah, I mean I think everyone would agree with that. So yeah, I think that's fine as an ethical statement. Yeah, and Simon Blackburn was like, well, but how do you say that? Somebody has to come in and value that. And, well, yeah, he's right. He's absolutely right. But even so, yeah, I agree. It's minimizing suffering. Well, I won't say that. Maximal suffering is not an ideal state. Minimizing suffering maybe not ideal either, because who are the people who just want to kill everyone or let everyone die? I think that's a BS idea as well. But antinatalists, is that?
Negative utilitarians believe that.
Okay, yeah.
More moral importance than happiness and pleasure, right? So the goal is to minimize suffering, not necessarily to maximize pleasure.
That reminds me. Okay, so I was going to look up the quote, but I'll just go off of it from memory. Because we were talking about oh yeah, when I was talking with Jack about like effective altruism and that, keeping people alive, of course, is very important. Saving lives, I think, is one of the best things you can do. So C.S. Lewis had said something like, there's how did he put it? Like, poetry and art have no life-saving value, but they make life worth saving, or something like that. Which I think, is a good point. Of course we want to save lives. We want to save as many people as we can, but for what? There's something living for, right? So I still see value in people dedicating themselves to, on the face of it, things that don't contribute to saving lives. Somebody who's being an artist rather than developing some technology.
For me, it's more about allocation of resources.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what proportion of humanity should be spending time on grand acts
mm-hmm.
of making children with cancer happy, in the example of Make-A-Wish Foundation.
Right, yeah.
Like, how much resource should actually go to something like that, when like you could get those kids like an Xbox and provide many weeks of enjoyment, but no, we're going to do these grand acts because it makes everyone feel all warm and fuzzy.
Right, yeah, right.
And the kid's happy for a day. Like, great.
Right.
Happy for a day. Awesome.
Because there you're already out to do something charitable. So
yeah,
what's going to be the best way to do it, right?
Yeah. And it's like, the Helen Keller Foundation, which is like my preferred it's my charity of choice if I'm giving to a cause. And like it cures blindness for really cheap, right? It's like, I don't know, from a Christian angle, you'd be like, that's what Jesus did. Must be pretty special to cure blindness.
Right.
But just in general, like, if someone can see, isn't that at least as valuable as having the Notre Dame?
Yeah. Curing blindness. That's amazing.
The face of their own child.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, there's so much. Besides the pure aesthetics of it, obviously they'll get lots of value from the aesthetics of being able to see. But like, these are people in third world countries trying to figure out how to provide for themselves and for family, and they're blind, and they're doing it in a third world country, and like that's just a really tough life, and you could cure it for really cheap. But instead of like, I can't remember how cheap it is, but it's like super cheap. It's like cure blindness for like $200.
Yeah.
$200, you cure someone of blindness. Like, amazing.
Mm-hmm. That is amazing.
And like, so you pay $10,000 and you save 500 people of blindness or whatever it is, if I did the math right. Or you could provide $10,000 to Make-A-Wish Foundation and one wish.
Yeah.
For $10,000.
Right.
It says Batman. Like that was what you spent your $10,000 on.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay. Like, our priorities here are skewed.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised, like, this will betray my evil globalism, but so I wouldn't be surprised if, like, centuries from now, assuming things get nice and not bad, that people could look back on our time and be like, wow, they allowed people who lived on the other side of the world as them to live in such poor conditions. How could they allow that to happen? And they had enough resources to bring everyone out of poverty, and they didn't. That'll just seem like incomprehensible.
Singer's story of the child in the pond, it just strikes me as so true. Like, yeah, if I had a really expensive Armani suit, to bring up Armani again, it wouldn't matter if the child is drowning. I'm going to sacrifice my suit. I'm going to jump in the water and I'm going to lose my $2,000 suit or whatever it is. But like, why didn't I spend that $2,000 in the first place to save?
Right. Yeah.
Like, is it just because they're far away?
Yeah. Now,
Like,
does Peter Singer, does he propose like states allocating resources as well?
how states should? Is that
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just read A Life You Can Save, well, a couple months ago, I guess, a few months ago. And he does talk about how international development aid is effective. It does help. And he talks about sort of kind of like these natural experiments that is the case, and that governments should spend, I think it is whatever, I think maybe like WHO recommends a certain amount that nations should
Oh, okay.
make, and he endorses that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it just seems like it would be, well, I don't know the numbers. I would just imagine you could probably, if you only have to pass a bill rather than repeatedly convince individuals to donate things. And I don't know what's the staying power of like, I'm just picturing like, maybe somebody donates for a year and then gets distracted and moves on to other things. Just thinking of human nature, but like how effective it is to work, from individuals doing donations and stuff.
Like how much more effective it is if individuals do it versus nations?
Yeah. 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 I don't know. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the chief difficulties because, this is a current debate going on right now with Bill Gates, right? Mm-hmm. Like we tax Bill Gates a whole bunch of his money and the government could spend it. And what is the government going to spend it on?
Yeah.
Not vaccines.
Yeah, no, Bill Gates is probably, I know that there are some people who say he's going to kill us all, but no, it seems like he's probably a good person to have his money at the moment. He seems to know what to do with it.
He's, but he's also N of one, just one individual.
Right. Yeah. He's just a very rich individual. So that's good.
Very altruistic. I mean, the most in terms of money given them, I think he's more than anyone else in history.
Yeah. I guess, thinking back to my, my idea of like 500 years from now, people looking back on us, I'm guessing if world poverty is solved, there would probably be some type of development in the way we structure states that would have brought that about. I don't imagine it would just be that like everyone's more charitable. In the intervening centuries.
I don't imagine that poverty, like I think it is possible that poverty is solved. Like the universe is going to be around for a long time. Mm-hmm. Unless humanity destroys itself, like it's very extremely likely that poverty will get solved. And if it is solved,
that's an encouraging thought.
Yeah. And if it is solved, it's because, governments instituted good economic policy, good welfare policy, because businesses were successful, because we developed technology. But it won't be because you donated $200 to restaurant. Right?
Not that I want to discourage people from doing that. I mean, I think that's great. I'm just kind of thinking, the big picture here, at the end game. But
this is kind of Tyler Cowen's argument in Stubborn Attachments, where he's like, the number of people in the future is much, much more than the people in the present. So we should prioritize expanding wealth, creating more wealth. Mm-hmm. And he kind of argues that basically like kind of simple intuition that like people are better off in wealthier countries.
Yeah.
Or we should prioritize that.
Yeah.
And he's like, taking into account human rights, yes, I'm not going to get too much into that, but yes, we should prioritize human rights. I'm not going to try and justify that. I'm just going to take it as axiomatic that human rights are good. Someone else can argue that. But I find that a very compelling thing. It's like, we should be spending a significant portion of our time and efforts in just growing the economy and creating wealth. And he actually argues that our discount rate should be 0, meaning that one person's life 300 years from now is just as valuable as someone's life today.
Okay.
Which is a fairly controversial opinion. Because
what type of dilemma would put that into play?
For example, welfare, like saving one person's life today just almost doesn't really seem worth it, because you could spend that money and invest it and create much more wealth, and save many more lives in the future.
Yeah, I can see why that's controversial. I don't know if I agree with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about it either.
Yeah. Seems like there's a false dichotomy in there somewhere.
Could be. I'd be really curious you can either read the book or there's a 2-hour podcast I recommend.
Yeah. Okay. Huh, interesting. But yeah, I mean, the idea of of having wealth available seems quite clearly important. So like, what was the latest stat I heard? That we have the means to have everybody live on $10,000 a year, and so we could bring everybody out of poverty, which on the face of it is nice, but also $10,000 a year isn't all that much either. I mean, I know a lot of people would be very, very happy with that, and that's much more than they have now. But I guess in $20 I think it would be nice if the whole world could live on $250,000 a year. That would be more ideal, and it doesn't seem impossible. I mean, it seems like that should be possible. I mean, obviously not tomorrow, but for everybody to have abundance and plenty to enjoy life. Well, and also things may become less expensive too. Like, so maybe $10,000 will be plenty in the future.
Yeah,
we'll see.
So, with the coronavirus, it's the first time, and I think it was like since the 70s that global poverty has increased.
Wow. Interesting. So, has that in the United States?
Global poverty.
Globally. Well, I'm just wondering if it has in the United States as well, or if this is it in other countries.
I mean, I assume it depends on how you define poverty, right?
And I'm asking you like this, like you have it on the top of your head.
I can't remember if they were talking about, what do they call it? Is it absolute poverty? Is that the term? Where it's like less than $1.25 a day.
Oh.
Or extreme poverty. Maybe that's the term, extreme poverty. So it's probably something like that. So probably in the U.S., extreme poverty has not increased. Like we're a nation that people just don't fall below that level.
Yeah, well, and I guess if you include the safety nets, it would seem like we don't let that happen.
Yeah, that too.
By the way, okay, a little bit of a tangent. Have you heard of the movie The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind?
No.
It's about the food crisis in hold on a second. I'm looking it up. Which country was it? It was in Africa. Wikipedia, you're not helping me. By William. Okay, let's see here. Malawi. There was a food crisis in Malawi back in 2001 or so. And it's basically about that. And then this boy created a wind turbine to run a pump to water the crops and was able to, feed his village based on that. But the food crisis part of the movie is just terrifying. Seeing what it was like in Malawi to, really like not just, you can't get toilet paper in the grocery store, but like you don't have food. There's no food at all, and people are killing each other for food. This was just like 20 or so years ago, and this type of stuff still happens. It was very eye-opening. I wouldn't say I even enjoyed the movie because those type of movies are just like, it's kind of like Castaway. You've seen Castaway?
Yeah.
Or it's just kind of like, I don't know how much of this I could take. It's just like too much. But anyway, it was rather eye-opening.
Yeah.
But to think like, yeah, that's how a lot of it is in the world, like that poverty level that you mentioned.
Yeah. I think we're running out of, or at least I'm running out of mental steam.
Yeah, it's okay. We can wrap it up. But now, did we solve foundationalism and the Izot problem and all that stuff? I lost track.
We solved the Izot.
I think we did. It's somewhere in there.
Have faith. That's the answer.
Yeah. We'll have to go back and listen to see what exactly the solution was. But I think pretty sure it was mentioned.
Yeah. Have some humility about describing, telling people what to do. Have better moral language. Have a little bit more nuance in there.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't solve it. At least we contributed.
Yeah, there we go. Very cool. Well, thank you very much for joining me and
thank you.
Chatting a bit. All right.
Next week we'll have to do kayaks. Yeah,
we'll mic ourselves, and that should be interesting. I'll drink caffeine, so I'll be in top form.
6 hours down the river.
Yes. Can find the coyotes that killed my chickens. Get back at them. All right. Well, so have a good night, and I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Over and out.